Institutions, organizations of all sorts take whatever you will give them. And when you have moved on for whatever reason, you got reorganized out of your job, you got fired, you decided to leave, you retired, that machine churning through people keeps going. Even the most purposeful organizations do that. So how much are you going to give? And how much are you going to save for yourself?
Hey, Creating Maven. I'm Joy Spencer, your reframe specialist, with one important message. Your real work, it's not your job or your career. Your real work is what you create. And what you create is what sets you apart and makes you incomparable. It's your legacy. I'm here to show you a whole new way of working so you can create with your gifts, make a unique contribution, and finally get paid to be yourself. This is Reframe to Create. Find your dream job. Work your passion and you'll never work a day in your life. Ever heard any of these? How does it make you feel to hear these? Do you feel inspired and ready to go find this amazing treasure? Or just tired and dejected when your dream job turns out to still be a job? I get it. There's a lot of messaging out there designed to help you find satisfaction in your job. And a lot of times it just leaves you feeling blah because you just can't figure out how to make this thing work. Why doesn't it work for you? What do you do with all of this? My guest for this episode has a lot to say about all of this. I first met Carol Hamilton at a conference a few years ago, and I recently saw her post something on LinkedIn about not needing to love your job. I think she was reading a book or a number of things on the topic, and I perked up. And I was like, wait, what is this? What are you talking about? What is this of which you speak, woman? I want to hear more. I want to talk more about this. So I reached out to her, and Carol is amazing. She is the host of Mission Impact Podcast, which focuses on progressive nonprofit leaders who want to build a better world without becoming a martyr to the cause. Very important work. She interviews nonprofit experts to explore how they can make their organizations more effective and innovative for greater mission impact. She's also the principal of Grace Social Sector Consulting, and she facilitates what she calls whole brain equity-focused strategic planning. Isn't that amazing? Doesn't that just sound wonderful? And she does impact mapping, service audits, and organizational assessments for nonprofits and associations. And as someone who came out of the nonprofit world, anyone who's doing work to make the nonprofit world and all the causes better is a hero to me. So Carol is my hero. She combines what she calls left brain strategy and analysis with right brain wisdom about human complexities for a proven whole brain, whole organization process through which every stakeholder can thrive. She's also a member of a consultant collective, which is focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion that has a particular focus on racial equity called All In Consulting. This is why she has all the receipts to help us dive into this conversation about jobs. How are we feeling about them? Do we love them? Do we hate them? Are they dreams come true? And what do we do with all of this so that we don't get lost in the sauce of it all? We get right to it. You'd posted something some months back about you don't have to like your job or not needing to love your job or something of the sort. And I immediately perked up and I was like, oh, someone's talking about jobs and maybe feeling ambivalent about them. And, maybe taking an alternative look from the your job must be your passion sort of trope that we're sort of getting. And I was curious, what you were talking about. So tell us about that, what your thoughts are and about the job and whether you should love it, like it or not, and sort of what was going through your mind at the time with that post.
Yeah, it was very much in reaction to this whole notion that you need to find your passion. And then if you find your passion and you do that for your job, the saying of, if you love your job, you won't work a day in your life. I'm calling bullshit on that. It's still work. And I grew up with that. Like my entire career was kind of the trajectory of that becoming the way that we think about work, at least in the US and in our context. And I'm sure it's now spread around the world. But over the last couple of years, I've really been thinking more about like what's the role of work in my life, kind of questioning those things. I grew up in a family where achievement was definitely front and center. My family representing the rest of the culture of, productivity definitely defines your worth, Protestant work ethic, all of that kind of thing. And I would say pretty much since I moved into I guess it's my sixth decade, which means my 50s. I don't know if I'm getting the math right. Starting to say, okay, this can't be all there is in life. And, I have a family, I have a daughter. I have a grandson now. Like there's a lot more to life. And I've always known but it has also been really hard to not prioritize work. And our culture is so oriented around that. And so the post that I put up was in response to having read a couple books recently, one of which was called The Good Enough Job. That book was about that person who was, I think, probably a millennial, and I'm a Gen Xer, who was kind of trying to disentangle his identity from work. And very much had come up in the, find your passion and you will find, fulfillment in life. And I just related a lot to it and trying to, start to cultivate other things in life besides just work. And I know you're talking to people who are looking at how can I liberate my work, so not just from a job. And in a way, I had already done that in that I have my own consulting practice, but there are constraints in that as well. It's not completely liberated. So that's kind of where it started, or where I am in that evolution of thinking about things.
So you've gone from this journey of this, what typically people have where work is at the center, and now you're beginning to move towards, okay, maybe it doesn't need to be, whether it's, work of a job or consulting, but like there are other things that are more important. What was going on? Like what was sort of, I guess, other than time, sort of like creating that sort of irritation or that rub for you that made you want to like dig deeper into this question?
Yeah, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, it's actually been there for a long time. I still had workaholic tendencies, and I still, would overcommit, whether it was work or volunteer things. I said yes to too many things. I was always feeling stretched, always in that I'm too busy. And, honestly, since probably my early 20s, I saw my dad retire, and I saw how difficult it was for him to make that transition because he had this big job. It was very much his identity. And so I'd always had this thought in the back of my mind of like, I don't want to be so identified with work that is like such a difficult transition. So it's been there like as a seed. And yet I saw the gap end, every time I did all those exercises of like, do your values and what's important to you in life, relationships and family and my daughter and my husband and all the things, they were always at the top of the list, but my behavior wasn't matching that. And I was trying to get at, well, what's underneath that? And I'm, continuing to try to get at what's underneath that. Why was my default so to dedicate to work, even when intellectually I knew that's not what I wanted, but yet my default was to spend more time there.
Yeah, I think inquiring minds will want to know, because I think that's a thing that a lot of people can identify with. Like where we talk about it, we all talk about like what's most important to you, and like the 5 top regrets of the dying. Like like we know, right? We know it, like it's always like work is not, don't work so hard. Work is not the top of the list, but yet still, we find ourselves prioritizing this thing that we know that, at least for most of us, is not the thing that's ultimately most important to us, or that will ultimately be most important at the end of the day. And we struggle not just to, come in, do the thing, make sure you're doing your hobbies, make sure you're taking care of your family, but don't let this thing be central, even though it's like, something we struggle not to make it our identity. And I wonder if there were any insights from the book that you read or from this journey that can help us, like, well, how do we, because it seems like it's not just our work that we need to liberate. We need to liberate ourselves as well.
And I think for me also kind of unpacking, having chosen to work in the nonprofit sector or, mission-driven work, purpose-driven work, and always, from one job to the next. And then in my consulting, always trying like, how can I be leaning more into my strengths, be doing more, work that really is joyful as much as possible. So really in all of that mindset, but then it's like, how do you do the jujitsu of, okay, you're doing that because you know that you have to spend a chunk of time while you're working in that, so you might as well enjoy it, and yet not have it be your identity, not have it be everything that defines you.
Hmm.
So I don't know if it's, you don't have to love your job, but all the mantras around, if you love your job, you're not working, quote unquote, what the downside of that is. What is the cost
Hmm.
of that thinking? And is there a way to find a middle ground between the two?
Well, what have you seen is the cost of that way of thinking, both for you and what you've observed in other people?
Yeah, I think especially in the nonprofit sector or anything where you're really pursuing your passion, it's easy for organizations to exploit that.
Hmm.
There's the assumption that in the nonprofit sector, at least, you're not doing it for the money. Well, sure, but that doesn't mean that you want to work for barely living wage or poverty wages. You still want to thrive. There are just many ways in which that whole notion can get weaponized, and there's so many assumptions built into the work that doesn't honor the people who are doing the work.
Yeah, it's how you're identifying yourself so closely with your work and with your value, your worth and virtue and what it means to be a good person and to be doing good work in the world, kind of like earning your salvation, right? And and then it's like and then they're like, "Don't you just want to work for the rest of your life for pennies?" You
And I think a lot of the folks who run organizations are caught in that too. They're allowing themselves to be exploited, and then then they can't imagine that anyone else would. They're working way too much. They're being a martyr to the cause, and so it's a vicious cycle.
Yeah. So it's not just like you don't have to maybe you can love your job, maybe you don't have to love your job. Your job doesn't have to be the center of your world, but it's like your job doesn't have to define your sense of worth or value.
Yeah.
And that's a tough order in this society. In America, in the Northeast specifically. And I know that, people who are listening are from all over the world and from different
They're like,
parts.
what are those crazy Americans doing?
Yeah, but I do think that the American world, as it is a global work market increasingly, and I think that that American ethic, that American ethos is feeding out and filtering out into other places. They may not be picking up and adopting it in the same way, but it is, trying to have an influence. And it is just very much about like what is at the center. I know that, back home, and I've shared this before, like, where I'm from, you can't tell people that you're missing birthdays, you're missing major events, you're missing, weddings, you're missing funerals because you got to work. Like you can't tell anybody that. Like they'll look at you cross-eyed. Like it's like it makes absolutely no sense. But here you could. You could say, "Oh, sorry, I can't make your wedding, I got to work this weekend." And, someone could possibly, depending on how close you are to them, they could possibly be like, "Oh, okay. That would make sense." Here. Doesn't make sense other
And
places.
and really, in terms of human thriving, it doesn't make sense.
No, it
Like,
doesn't.
if we come down to it, it really doesn't make sense. But we drank the Kool-Aid.
But I think COVID was a big shakeup. Sort of like we were on a merry-go-round. Suddenly the merry-go-round stopped. Everyone sort of fell off, bumped their heads, and were like, "What is going on? What am I doing?" And as the merry-go-round has started back up again, some people are like, "This doesn't make sense for me to be on this thing that's making me dizzy and sucking the life out of me." So even as people are still entering and participating in the workforce, they're participating in a different way, with a different mindset, with a different view about what's most important and what am I going to put and make central, both in terms of my time, but just also my priority and how I think about it, how I look at it, and the energy that I put into it.
So some of the things that I'm trying to be better about and is to just have a little more spaciousness. I have the luxury of having my own consulting practice, so I have a little more control over my schedule. I think there's an illusion when if you're kind of going into business, this kind of business, that you have total control, which is true. But you have more, right? So I can shape things a little bit more to fit, my energy level during the day, or how many days that I'm having meetings and those kinds of things, just to create a little more space and a little more ease, because that merry-go-round, and people, all the things are like, oh, everyone's so busy, and I don't want to say that. I don't want to be in that. It's not something I'm aspiring to. The way I'd like to be living is a little more like they have the slow food movement. I just want the slow living movement.
I
The
love
slow
it.
working, so that you can go deeper and you can, be really present for people when you are with them and working on something.
I like that.
But things are not set up for that. It's going against the grain for sure. Here.
Yes, that's why it's a revolution. That's why I see it as warfare. I see it as showing up with a warrior mindset about my time and my priority and my energy and my focus. Where am I putting my attention first? Unless you play the lottery tomorrow and you win the lottery and then you get your $1 billion and you no longer have to be beholden to a job and you can, lay on the beach with a pina colada.
What's my fantasy if I do that? Once I've, paid everyone's debts off in the family, is to set up a foundation and start giving away money.
So you will be back in some sort of fashion of
I will
work.
be back at work.
Yeah, and it's not about and this is the thing. It's not about like, you're trying to jettison work. Work is it's a beautiful, wonderful thing. It's just like there's just all these other types of trappings that get put onto jobs that weigh down real work, in my view, because work to me, as I define it as what you create with your gifts, your talents, and what you're offering in service to the world. And it can be and live in so many different vehicles. But again, orienting yourself and where is the focus, where is your energy, and what do you spend time on first? When you wake up first thing in the morning, are you reaching towards a phone, your work phone, to check email? Or when you wake up first thing in the morning, do you have an hour of spaciousness where you're engaging and fully present with your family, or you're fully present reading, or you're fully present taking a walk, or just anything that's really just your life, and going, and not just at that moment, but every moment your life is at the center of your life, and these other things they're the planets that are orbiting the sun of the center of your life, and then everything is in order, versus when the job is at the center and emails and urgency and productivity. And then, people, that's when people get stressed and everything sort of gets out of whack at that point. So, from what you're saying about like, even if you go out and you consult and whatever you do, there's still that time constraint. You're always going to have challenges. It's really sitting with me that this is about mindset shift, about your orientation, what's at the center and what's on the periphery. And then where do you put your focus first and most of the time? That's it. Because, like I said, unless you're winning the lottery, you are going to be in some sort of job or some sort of work. There's something that you're going to be doing for a period of time of your life. But it's not about escaping that. It's about reorienting, reorganizing how that features in your life and how and where you put your focus.
Yeah, and so for folks who've been artists, they've had a day job, or musicians, or other people who've pursued those kinds of work. So to go back to the original thing, it could be that your job is a day job, and it's supporting other things, you may or may not be pursuing them for eventual financial gain. And so one of the things I've been trying to do is having more creative hobbies, and just having them be hobbies. I was a single mom for a bunch of time of my daughters growing up. And so that was a very time crunched period. Every minute was taken. But one of the things that I would do to save a little bit of money is that I would make these greeting cards, for birthdays, for whatever. And my mom would say to me, oh, you should do that kind of as a side hustle, right? There wasn't the term side hustle back then. But even then I was like, no, if I do that, it will take the joy out of it for that particular thing. Not to say that all side hustles aren't joyful, but for that one, for me, even though I had a little copyright and Carol's Cheap and Cheesy Cards and a logo on the back of the cards with a little mouse and his cheese, this was a special thing that I did for myself and for, family and friends. And so then now, more recently, I've been trying to do more drawing. And I'm also like, my sister is an artist and she always wants to say that I'm an artist too. And I kind of resist that label because it feels like it makes it very official and like I should be striving for something. And I'm like, no, I just want to do this for fun. And sure, I could get better and maybe, and I share it. I put it on Instagram, not because I think I've got anything to like show off, but just almost for accountability and being able to say, oh, it's been a little while since I've done something and posted it. Being aware of more people making space for those kinds of things as part of that kind of disentangling all of your identity from work.
I love it because it's about bringing more into your orbit and more into the center of your life. It's like we're multi-passionate. We have different things going on. You can have a hobby that doesn't need to turn into a side hustle. You could have a hobby and a side hustle and a job and a practice if you want. You got the energy for it, or you don't. But it's finding all the different ways and all the different outlets that you need to have to be a full human being who is really engaged in life. And I think for a lot of people, just job, home, sleep is not enough. And their stress levels are so high, not because they're doing too much, they're doing too much of just one thing. They're doing too much of that job thing, and they need to add to their life. And, turn the volume down a little bit, but add a hobby. Add their creative hobby, commit to consistently creating. And I love that you said you put it on Instagram to be accountable, because that's about knowing that it's still worthwhile, it's still valuable to put out there into the world, even if you're not selling it, even if you're not turning it into a business. But that's your gift. That's something that you're taking seriously and enjoying and sharing with others to enjoy as well. So I love it. You're an inspiration to others. I'm just trying to find so many different ways for people to not find an excuse to to hide out and not create, because they're like, oh, I can't figure out how to make money from it. Don't worry, you don't have to do that. Oh, it's not a really big thing. Don't worry, it doesn't have to be big. You just need to be in the game, right? It's not about winning the game. It's just about being in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd always known that, they talk about flow states, and the ones that I'd been able to recognize in the past were, I'm a swimmer. So when I'm swimming, that definitely is one. And in the ocean, jumping in the waves, definitely another. Any sport that I've ever played, I am focused on that. But I also noticed that with drawing, right? I'm like, I am not super talented, but I am completely focused and have that lose time kind of feeling. That's why I'm doing it. And again, I guess that's going back to kind of process versus output, or, I'm not striving for a particular outcome, but I'm just really sinking in and enjoying the moment and being really present in that flow.
And that's such a lost art form for a lot of us. This
Right?
being able to be in any kind of process and just be experiencing and enjoying something for the enjoyment and the pleasure, the delight that it brings, and letting that be that. And so I think that there's so much life that you allow yourself to come back into your life when you allow yourself to have those things and make those kind of spaces in your life and for your experience. What's the biggest change that you feel that you've experienced from beginning to adopt more of this mindset?
Maybe it's the mindset, but maybe it's also being intentional and slowly changing how I'm doing things. One of them is not being sleep deprived. Actually, and then realizing what that actually feels like. And that has been I'm like, oh, I'm not completely exhausted at the end of the week. I still end up with weeks where I am, but even knowing what it means to feel fully rested.
And this is from creating more and slowing down. Like what is yes, because this I love sleep, and I'm sure many people do. So
not having to commute to a job helps a lot. So that is a luxury that I have. I work from home. I am able to, set my day to start a little bit later and kind of ease into the day a little bit more than I ever was before when I had less control over my schedule. So there's that functional side of it, but the revelation for me has really been realizing how different it feels and what that even feels like, which is a crazy thing.
Folks think this is a luxury, and yes, you're at home and you're working from home.
Like, why should that be a luxury?
That's the question, right? And I think that even just slowing down in your mind about what it is that you're doing or need to go about is a way of bringing rest into your life, even if you feel that you still have a lot that you quote unquote have to do. I think there's something to be said for intentionally slowing down. And I do this when if I'm going somewhere and I realize I'm running late and I've become late, the moment I get into the car, I commit to being late
Mm.
because I'm not rushing. You know, I'm not going to run through lights. I'm not going to get into any kind of accident. I intentionally once I'm like I'm late and I start to feel that I go ahead and I go ahead and send the message and I'm like I'm late. And I just accept it. I almost try to be even later. Not because I'm trying to be a jerk, but because I know that when you're in that high intensity space, I'm going to get into an accident and I don't want to get into an accident. And so I would rather just show up late, not as sweaty as I would have been, and just accept that that's just what it is. Nothing has changed, right? All the quote unquote things that are on the list, all those things are still there. They're still happening, but there's something to be said for accepting the plate is too full. The food is literally falling off the plate. I'm going to have to let it fall to the floor. Or these are things that are happening, and it's like you take the L, right? I've missed the exit. Instead of trying to cut across 6 cars to take it, I'm going to take the L. I'm just going to keep going to the next exit. I'm going to be late. I'm in a little bit of traffic. It is going to be what it is because there's something else that's more important. My sanity, the rest, the ability to reflect, the ability to pause. And so, I think even if people can't, think they can't get more sleep or take things off their plate, you can slow down and really think about, okay, why am I moving so quickly? Can I slow down? I'm going to slow down. And and this is going to even give me space to think about how I'm going to make some changes so that this can become more part and a feature of my life and my experience.
And I certainly have not gotten it right. I just had to step away from something that I realized I'd said yes to a little bit out of kind of guilt and obligation. And I was feeling myself starting to feel resentful when the meetings were not a good time for me during the week. I was like, okay, I need to listen to my body, listen to my dread when this meeting pops up on my calendar, and just say, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna. And this was a volunteer engagement. Sorry, I'm gonna have to step away from this. For me, I feel like I'm definitely still learning how to do this. I have intentions, and then I have to keep checking in with myself of, I'm getting better. The gap used to be really wide between those values and those intentions and the behavior, and I'm slowly getting them closer, but there's still a gap.
And isn't that what we're all doing, learning and growing and taking the lessons and going back around and trying to do it again better? If you had to do it all over again, like your career, you enter the time machine. So what's the name? Was it Christopher Lloyd shows up in the DeLorean?
Oh, Back to the Future.
Yes, and then you go back, to the beginning of your career and you get to tell yourself with all the lessons and all the knowledge that you have about work at the center or the periphery or rest and sleep and all, what would you tell yourself and how would you do this differently?
That's a hard one because I was the sole provider for my daughter and for our family. So I felt that pressure to do well in work so that we would, be all right. And I think looking back, I don't remember what those projects were. I mean, I have a general sense of what they were, those big deadlines, whatever, that tomorrow is another day. And a lot of these deadlines are artificial. A lot of this urgency is artificial. When you're in an organization, there's only so much you have control over when you're kind of in the middle, which I often was. But that reminder, I think, would be one.
It would be bringing you back to an internal sense of calm, helping you to have that internal calm, even as your outside environment was demanding rush, demanding speed, and all of that. And what I'm hearing from what you're saying also is that we are in different stages and different phases of our lives and our work lives, right? Being a single parent and what how they have to interact and engage with work on a job is different from a married couple, is different from someone who's about to retire, is different from a single person. So you and is different from someone at the beginning of their career versus someone in the middle or the end. So there's no one size fits all about how you have to be or how you have to look at it. And it can change and it can shift. But I think one thing I think it's important for people to remember is that it comes to an end. I always say, every job's going to come to an end. Either you're going to get fired, and hopefully not, or you're going to dump the job and move on to something else, or you're just going to retire because you're at the end of the work experience. And if you begin with the end in mind, or just keep it in that view of don't make permanent decisions for temporary situations, which all of these are temporary, how does that change how you engage? How does that change whether or not you're going to destroy your sleep for this thing or your health, or your relationships?
Absolutely. That was another kind of lesson that I took from my dad and how he worked. And he had big jobs and he worked many, many hours into the night, and ultimately when he retired, institutions, organizations of all sorts take whatever you will give them. And when you have moved on for whatever reason, you got reorganized out of your job, you got fired, you decided to leave, you retired. That machine churning through people keeps going. Even the most purposeful organizations do that. So how much are you going to give? And how much are you going to save for yourself?
Mic drop. Yeah. At the end of the day, we need to remember what we're in and what is what and who is who and what's important and what's not and what everybody's aim and objective is. And that doesn't mean that you don't work hard. That doesn't mean that you don't give it your all, but it means that you do it with your eye on the ball. You do it with a real attentiveness to reality, and you do it not thinking that your work family is your real family, seeing as your real families, most of them are not going to fire you. Or they can't technically, right? Or we're not promoting people over others, that sort of thing. All parents love all their children equally. Cough, cough. Um, but just keeping the main things, and staying in reality. And that is so important and just such a powerful lesson to always keep at the front of your mind. I think at the root of it, that's what it is.
This is an economic contract. Work is an economic contract. It is not a family.
Yeah, true. And I don't think it's a sad thing. I don't think it's anything to be sad or upset about, but it's like we've gotten the wool pulled over our eyes with this work, passion, job, like all these things are designed to pull you emotionally in at a much deeper level. And when it doesn't pan out, people are so devastated. But that's never what it was to begin with in the beginning. And remember, it's an economic contract. You can be freed up. It's a type of liberation. You can be freed up to create elsewhere. You can be freed up to live your life, engage and invest in your family, your community, all the other things that you need to and should be that we've now started putting into to jobs because we're pulling back, unfortunately, from a lot of all these other places and spaces.
For big corporations, for profit, perhaps there was a little maliciousness in that. Let's pretend that this is something that it isn't. I think for, a lot of the people that I work with who work in, mission-driven organizations in the nonprofit sector, there isn't a maliciousness in that. And institutions still do that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a both and in that. And when it's that passion, when it's that greater purpose, when you're working towards some mission that you're really passionate about, it's also there easy to forget that it's still an economic contract. I actually was talking to someone recently for my podcast who does work around equitable compensation. And she said one of the conversations she wants organizations and people in organizations to have as they think about equitable compensation is, how do we define an employee, and not necessarily just from the legal point of view, but what's our philosophy around that? What is our philosophy about what being a good employee, all the things, so that you actually have a shared understanding of what that social and economic contract is, versus everyone just assuming something different. Just so interesting. I would have never connected that to creating more equitable compensation policies.
Yeah, well, I'd love to hear more about how that conversation turns out, or what you learn when hear more from that, because that gets to and goes to the root of, why most of us are working, that economic compensation, the equity, and all of that that's needed in that as well. So that's interesting. I think we've come to some big conclusions. It's around orientation and mindset, always remembering what the institution is that we're dealing with and interacting and engaging with. It's not about whether you love your job or don't love your job. It's just about seeing your job for what it is.
Seeing your job for what it is, being realistic about what this is. I love doing the work that I do now. I really I've come to a point where it is very much in alignment, and it's still work. Both are true.
That's it. Both are true. You can love your job sometimes. You can hate it sometimes. It can be a dream sometimes. It can be a nightmare at other times. The key is to remember that it's a job. It's an economic transaction. And this doesn't have to be a bad thing or something that makes you cynical. It's actually very liberating and something that can help you to keep it in its place. It can become something that supports your life, that supports your mission, rather than something that sits in the center of it all, sucking all the air out of the room. You get to choose. It's all how you choose to look at it. It all depends on the reframe you choose. If you want to hear more good stuff from Carol, then check out her podcast, Mission Impact, and follow her on LinkedIn. I've included her details in the show notes. Now, just because you've put your job in its place doesn't mean you don't have work to do, my creating maven. Just because you're not going to look to your job to feel fulfilled and have a sense of fulfillment does not mean that you do not have a purpose to fulfill. Your real work is not your job or your career. Your real work is what you create. You've still got the responsibility to create with your gifts. So how's that going? Are you still stuck and trying to figure out what this might be? I recently worked with a client to help her go digging for treasure in her resume, and boy, did we find the thing she does that is a service that she can now use to get paid to be herself from other clients. I bet I can find what getting paid to be you looks like for you in your resume as well. Visit reframetocreate.com/resume-excavation to get your session booked and your gifts unleashed. See you soon, Creating Maven. Until then, remember to always ask yourself, what will I create?